So welcome to this, actually it's the joint session from the FDO Forum's working groups from all of the four, so probably you took part in some of the working group meetings just before this meeting here. So we recognized already some gaps where we have to work on, and the first two presentations now is about two examples, which is where we have some open things to do, actually. And one is the notion of collection, and Stian is already here and will talk about this. And the second one will be Peter, talking about the relation between FDOs and operations. We already started a little bit to discuss in the working group or in this meeting before. Here I have to ask, we have a speaker, Dieb. Is he here? Could you go over there and get a microphone and all these things? And he is from the Japanese Institute of Material Science, and we will get a view on this group and a Japanese view on the FDOs. And then after that we will discuss a little bit or reflect what we achieved and what is the next steps. So I hand over to Stian. And
all right, thank you. So you've already been on the working groups and maybe had a bit of a deep dive about fair digital objects. Maybe some of you did get a bit scared because there were some big diagrams and things like that. I'll promise not to have any big diagram. There's one in there, so let's hope it's not too bad. I won't talk much about FDOs, actually. I'll talk more about collections, because this is one gap that we haven't really fleshed out yet with FDOs. How do we deal with collections, and what does it even mean? So if we just can put my slides up on the screen, please, so you can see it. There we go. So that was me. And I'm not getting the next slide. Hang on. All right. So what do I mean by collection? Well, you probably know it already, because we're in a museum. There are lots of collections already here, right? So a collection could just be a gathering of artifacts that have a common ownership. The museum owns some things. That's our collection, right? You can go and see it, of all different types of things. Or maybe they have a shared origin. Maybe everything coming from Tutankhamun's burial chamber, for instance, right? So they all have something in common in their provenance of where they're coming from. Or maybe there's some other way they are related. They all have some theme. They are all coming insect specimens of pollinators, for instance. And if we think about this, it could also be collections as an organizational thing. You're used to having institutions that have departments and so on. That's also a kind of collections of more abstract things that we cannot grasp. Or could be very concrete things like parts in a car. Right? So we have all those non-digital objects. We know how to do collections of those. And what does it mean for digital objects? So let's try to characterize them. First of all, we have to sort out, are we doing this by composition or by reference, right? The parts of a car, are we pointing to them or are we putting them together in a box, right? It's very important because we're going to store these digital objects, we're going to retrieve them and so on. It's quite important in terms of access and so on that we agree how we do this. Can they be in more than one collection, or do the collection own the item? That's also a good hint that it is a composition rather than by reference. Are all the content of the same type, or are they many different types, right? So are we combining documents and videos and all kind of things, or are they all very precise spreadsheets that all follow the same formulas? Is the collection a set or a list? This is a very computer science kind of question to ask, but it is a very small fundamental difference. Is, can the same item be there multiple times, right? And does that mean the items are unique or not, right? So we need to understand what does it mean to be unique. So a collection can be open-ended or it could be closed. It could be open-ended as like everyone who eats pasta, right? They may not know it, but they could be in that collection, right? Or it could be a closed collection, some list you've written down. Mostly we like these kind of lists because they are tangible, we can grasp them, we know what's in it, but they can run out of date, right? So there's some way to update the collection. And what is the main focus? Is it the collection or the content? Are we talking about the the individual items, that's what is important? Or is it just that they have been gathered that is important? These items are just justifying the reason why we have made a collection. And so that comes down to how we describe these things. So we're talking about metadata. We heard a bit before about that, how we could break down into key values and attributes and so on. Many ways you can do that, and of course you need to agree which attributes you want to keep. Some of them you need it on the collection, but also some on the item, because the items are more than just some pointer to something. They are in the collection for some reason. So I've just brought along some examples from my world that I know the best of linked data, but I think it applies well to many other kinds of digital collections. So, for instance, these are the type of single digital object collection. Objects that are just one object, a collection that is just one digital object, things you can just grasp. So you have collections that only exist as a gathering of metadata. So DCAT, in a sense, can be exemplified as being that way, or any kind of use of Dublin Core. You have some metadata about something, and there's nothing more, right? You heard before about how maybe there's some downloadables and so on. There's grasping into being like kind of 1.5 object, maybe. We often have these landing pages because we don't want some, JSON files appearing up to humans files. You want to have some nice representation. So that is kind of a single object, and that's mostly how things appear in repositories today, right? You click some identifier and you get one entry and you can look at it. And there could be embedded metadata in there that makes it a fair digital object. Or it could be more topological, where you have a structure about the object. And I'll show you a bit about that later. Then you have just navigation, fair signposting, as mentioned, as a way to navigate between objects. And of course, a collection is a way to navigate to a certain class of objects or things that are interesting together. We're talking about packaging, how you can put things together and then retrieve them all in one go. So Baggett and our creator examples of that, where you put many digital objects together and then retrieve them as a whole. And provenance and annotations are important for describing what happened and what you think about digital objects. So let's look a bit more active, because fair digital objects are also active. They're not just read-only, where you just look at them. You also do operations. And what kind of operation? Well, the most common ones are the CRUD, create, read, update, delete. Hopefully not delete. Don't delete too much. But we have common APIs already that some of you who manage repositories may know about, Fedora and Sword and so on. So they are dealing with how you update collections. Maybe you're adding to the collections. Linked data platform is the same, but on a metadata level, how you can add things to a knowledge graph. Sadly, most of these operations are following proprietary REST APIs, but maybe there are some specification that can help out. But usually they're different for each repositories. So when we talk about collections of digital objects, we have many digital objects that already are existing in their own right, and now you gather them, so you're doing pointers to them. There are more complicated or more elaborate ways you can do that, and there are existing ways that make this easier. And I have all the names here, which I'm not going to read out. So let's look a bit more about these examples. So here's one good example of how you do it in the, I would say, a classic model, the ORE, which is not so easy to pronounce, but it's quite simple to grasp. It's basically is that picture. That's the one diagram I'm including, where you have a collection, the red A1, and it's described by the resource map on the left there. So already you separated out the metadata from the collection. So collection can exist as a concept before you have described it. Like I mentioned, the items in a museum. Well, this museum is fairly new, but some museums are very old, and so they had things before they described them. Now you have some object, the yellow one, which have been aggregated into the collection. Obviously, you can have many of these, but that could pre-exist. So there could be many collections pointing to it. Now, here's a very powerful concept. You add this proxy in the middle, which is the concept of being aggregated in a collection. And that means you can give a description for why is it in the collection. You can give provenance to say, this is how it was added. So maybe Alice made the item, but Bob added it to the collection. And then we have more concrete examples of using DCAT, which is used a lot for describing data sets available for download and having very common metadata, such as licensing, creators, and so on. And there are some W3C standards for this, fairly open-ended, and that They do combine some existing terminology and so on, but still you don't know quite what is in there. So there are more specific profiles, and I think this is the most powerful thing we need in FDO digital object as well, is profiles. So saying, actually, it's not just following all these attributes. I always have these 5 attributes. I always have license. I always have download link, for instance. Right? And this is used by, this is mandated by some EU repositories for how you can index catalogs for data. So these are important examples that exist that are not calling themselves FDO digital object, but they're kind of lowercase FDO digital object collections, I would say, things we should look at. And the more web-centric one, schema.org, is used by the Google's dataset search, and that is indexing these kind of datasets. It's actually using a kind of reinvention of the DCAT because it's using a simplified version in schema.org. But it's the same concept. You have a catalog with some data sets and some downloads and so on. And that means you can present these things to the humans on the top there. You don't see the structured data. You get a filtered view upon your data. And one thing I've been working on in RCreate is how we can then do a profile of that again to be more specific for research data. So you can say these are the key and values we expect for research data when you package them. And crucially, I want to go one level in. I don't want to just describe the data set as an object. I also want to describe the items of that data set. Because for far too much, we know that there are mixed orders, mixed licenses, and so on. So we need to be able to go one level in and describe those as well. Now, those items in your collection may or may not be themselves digital objects with their own persistent identifiers and so on. And we need that kind of flexibility. And I'll come back to this as a set of questions we need to look at. So, what do we think we need in a very minimal FDO collection? Well, we know what is a collection. It's a pointer of objects. We have said we have PIDs. Let's just use them. We just list them. That's it. Job done. You have a collection. It's a very boring collection, isn't it? Because you just have a flat list of them. And you haven't even defined the semantics if there's an ordered list or not, right? But it's somewhere to start. We should be able to do that, and we should all agree about that this is a kind of collection. Because the more specific you get, the more it will vary depending on your domain and so on. What do you mean by a collection? What kind of attributes do you need? What is useful? So I think we can also move one level up and have a useful FDO collection where we have some minimal common metadata for the collection itself. I've already mentioned this, so it's more about provenance and licensing and so on. The type of it could be more interesting, because how do we characterize the content of a collection? Is there something common about all the objects in a collection? Is part of describing a collection as a type? And then how do we reference the sub-resources of that collection? So still you need extensibility for domain-specific collection, because like in this museum, they have very specific things like where was a specimen collected and so on. It would be the same for digital thing, right? We have samples from a patient, which you don't want to reveal that identifier, but you have a pseudo identifier that you're using, and you have some records about how this has been transcribed and so on. So maybe some additional very specific things are also useful. So you need this distinction between common and special. So you need multiple layers of metadata, both at the metadata for the collection, but also for items of that collection. So I wondered about the FDO collections. Can they also include elements that are not FDOs? And I think we have to do that because we haven't convinced the whole world to do everything in the same way. So we need to be flexible so collections can be built without having impossible task of converting everything, because then you get the chicken and egg problem and you're never going to get started. And I think we also heard today about kind of different ways of doing FDOs. I think also we should be flexible about that. But indicating the PID profile you have used might be an important part of a collection, so you know, how do I look at the things in it? So this is helping the machine agents to see what can I assume once I see a collection, when I see an FDO, what can I then do, right? So you should not have to know in advance everything. It should be able to have some kind of switching to look for the things it is caring about. Like you saw the Google dataset search, it only highlighted 4 of the attributes. There could be lots of things it didn't care about. And that's what it's like for all machine agents. They're very filtered. They only care about a few things. And this is why I think it's important with the profiles, because that can capture each of these kind of views on a fair digital object separate from the type system. All right, so that's all I had for me, and now we can discuss all those things.
Do I have to use it?
Yeah, so we're open for questions.
Yeah,
can't
actually
see
we
it
are
because
quite,
it's the light.
a little bit late in the schedule, but is there a direct question? So one question directly, so I could take this.
Thank you for the interesting talk. I'm wondering if you see the collection manager in the responsibility of verifying proper curation for the internal objects and therefore as a source of trust for the data.
This mic is not working, you see it? Yeah, okay. So that's a very important point. So the collection as a curated item, not just because the objects have been selected, but also validated. And for fair digital objects, that's a technical validation as well, where you have a certain profile, have a certain type, you have a trundle into them to see they are conforming to your expectations. Yeah, so that's a very important point. And that's also why the DCAT made the DCAT application profile, because then you could do the validation, because you have this must, should requirements, so you can check them.
So one question, Stian. How would you suggest to move ahead? I mean, the whole session here is about what next,
Okay,
right?
so I think
so how would you do, what is your concrete suggestion how to move? Since I see all this heterogeneity,
Yeah.
I just spoke with industry people, they do it differently, of course, right?
Yeah,
so
but
how would you see?
So we're all individuals. I'm not, says someone in the back, right? For those of you Monty Python fans. And that's the point. We have all these collections already. So we need to just gather them together and see what is common across them and get that out. We already done that for common metadata models, right? So there's been so many semantic mapping which have looked at all the metadata approaches and found the very same attributes appearing again and again. And lately here I've just published another paper about the meta about those again, right? So we should do the same for collections that we already have in FDO. And the biodiversity domain is one of the best of that already, right? That have already done. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they should come out with, I think, those two classifications, the very minimal and the ideal, still achievable recommended ones. Yeah? You had a questions? It's about identifiers.
I would say that is the last question because we have to continue. So, but we have in the end anyway a discussion, so you can ask further questions later.
I'm not sure if you are familiar with the nano publication, what is it, index, yeah, which is also a sort of collection
Exactly.
of, yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we could also use this type of, because it's also fair digital object or type.
Yeah, exactly. So Eric will argue tomorrow that the nano publications are also fair digital objects and already have solved, in a sense, level 0 for the collections, right? So and also the checking, at least in the consistency, because the nano-publication already are self-signed and verified that they are what they say they are. So that's a very important point. But I think it's not sufficient because you need also to do the specific profiles for each domain and each repository and so on.
Well, they can be made specific, so it is worth to look at.
Right.
So, let's see, let me move on. So actually, as Ivonne already said, we are behind the schedule a bit, and I think we should really come to reserve enough time for the reflection discussion at the end to get all your ideas how to move on. And that's where also Larry will come in. So I will try to make it very short. So Stian mentioned now one topic where we think we are not there yet to converge or so, and we need to address that and see in the FDO forum and hopefully get many people with us how to converge. The other area which we identified, but there are several more, And when I say we, I mean George, Ulrich, and Christophe, and a few. We sat together and said, as we discussed in the earlier session, the relationship between. No, that's not mine. You have to change order. The relationship between FDOs and operations is not that clear for us as well. So we need to think about how to do it. And my suggestion would here, well, get some good people together, interested people together in a workshop and sort things out in great detail. What I wanted to do in my presentation is briefly show you some issues. But now I'm waiting. Huh? Ah, here we are. Good, thank you. It's not shown there. Good. So just to briefly tell you, I mean, when we talk about FDOs, it doesn't really matter which implementation we look at. So it always look, we have some kind of PID, we have some kernel machine where you have all these references in a secured way, hopefully, and we have the resources which are out there. As Stian just mentioned, collections which are out there and so forth. So when we talk about relation between FDOs and operation, what do we actually mean? Oh, that was the wrong button. So what is there? No. Well, whatever. So what do we actually mean? Do we mean the at the PID level? Do we mean the FDO level? Do we mean the resource level, which are somewhere? Well, to just show you, I will not skip this, to just show you a bit of the issues by using one of a workflow which we used. You see here what my group was doing was pattern recognition on videos and audios. And here you see a typical machinery that identifies skin colors, and then it tries to cluster and to find movements of the body. I'll not discuss that, but this, of course, as you can imagine, is a workflow. So what does that now mean? Now, there are three different ways. Let me briefly introduce you, very briefly. You find the slides out there. So we could do it, by having in the PID record or landing page or whatever. We could do it by having an attribute which says there's an operation out there somewhere, right? You point to the operation and the operation can be executed. That is, of course, a very nice experiment for shielding, since you could be very selective in the operations you identify. And as you know, that should be in the case in FDOs, every attribute is secured, so only those who are administering these machineries are allowed to change things. So it's a secure way. So you could have an operation somewhere in a registry and start get an MPEG 2000 or whatsoever, or start the workflow process. So that's one way. The other way would be, looks a bit more complicated. You have the original video somewhere. You use DOIP, which is a protocol, to talk with in an object way, FDO object way, and you could have a proxy that transfers a DOIP call to something on the repository to get you the result, and put it somewhere, start an execution, and get back the annotations. So that's a complex process. How do we do this? What does DOIP, if we use such a protocol, what does it really help? And where are the security mechanisms? Where are the security issues which you have to solve if you work with sensitive data? No people want to have their faces online for everyone. So if you look to these operations, you have to make sure that this is kind of happening in a secure environment. So I'm just raising issues, not giving answers, as you can see here. So another way would be, we're talking a lot about DOIP. Some may have seen this protocol. It's meant to talk with digital objects, also fair digital objects. But what does it help for us? So when you look at the right side, we have a lot of things which we already mentioned. So we have rights records, we have usage licenses, we have all this kind of different metadata, we have bit sequences and so forth. They are somewhere in repositories. So what kind of, if a client is there and the client wants to talk with FDOs, what do what kind of calls or what kind of issues do we need to we need to support. So this is just a few elements. I was very short to save time. Just a few elements which I think we need to address in much more detailed way. And our suggestion would be, and we'll do this, continue this discussion a moment later in the reflection discussion. How do we go on in these areas where we clearly see gaps? George, anything from you to add here since you participated in this? Not? Good. So we'll certainly invite you all to a workshop, or so we need to think about this. I'm happy about any comment from your side, any idea, and probably move then to workshops to get people together to more in detail sort this out. Thanks a lot. Oops, pardon.
Okay, please. So now we have the presentation from Dieb, from the perspective of Japan. So, yeah. So you can.
Okay, it's not shown here. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dieb, and I am from the National Institute for Material Science in Japan. And my talk today is about an application. It's not theoretical. We try to apply FAIR data into materials data and see. This is an ongoing project, so we are still developing and working on it. So basically, today I would like to discuss the visualization of materials research topics in publication for institutional repository using natural language processing. So you know, like material science has application almost in many aspects of our life. And recently, the materials informatics movement is trying to utilize informatics principles to support materials design and discovery. So using FAIR data can really accelerate this process. And in this talk, we have in NIMS, National Institute for Material Science in Japan, we have several digital libraries, and we have this collected in the NIMS institutional repository. And these papers are usually publications from NIMS people or from outside. And then what NIMS did, we started this project to build a profiling service for our researchers. So each researcher has a page, like a catalog, and then it contains all his publications and all his output. And then these publications the metadata are all stored in XML. And then anybody can log in and see his publications. So in that way, NIMS can manage its own research activities. This catalog, Samurai, is connected to external database like ORCID and also some Japanese databases like Kekken. This is for all researchers in Japan, through using the persistent researcher ID. And in this work particularly, we would like to enhance this platform to allow improving the accessibility. We would like to introduce the material science research to the public. Then in that case, if we visualize this information about each researcher, what is he doing, how the research trend of his work has changed, and then we can find also similarities between different researchers. So this can allow for interoperable data that when research output is represented, and then it can be exchanged between different researchers. And in the same way, we would like to facilitate the data representation and management. So first, we collected several thousands of publications from this NIMS institutional repository, and then we grouped these publications by researcher. And so now we would like to extract representative keywords about each researcher output. But the challenge is how to do that, and we can use basic approaches in natural language processing. There are also several challenges how to collect data that is not available in NIMS institutional repository. Another thing is in materials science, there are also different naming for similar materials. There's commercial naming, and there is the chemical formula and the other things. And sometimes materials names are abbreviated in the text, so we have to link to be consistent with our work. And also, we need to link concepts between each other. Like there's a hierarchy between like materials classes and then materials themselves. So there are some challenges. Anyway, this is represented just a basic approach, how we approach this problem and trying to move towards fair research topic data. Because there are several approaches currently applying fair concepts to materials experimental data. I think Professor Scheffler has done some work on that. But our approach is to use the materials research topic data, not the experimental or materials property. So basically, we just use a basic natural language processing approach where we collect the data, we tokenize the data, and then we separated the important section. We only care at 3 sections for now: title, abstract, and keywords. And additionally, we use domain knowledge resources like chemical formula extractor and then measurement term dictionaries like measurement term extraction. And then these tokenized and then term frequency analysis is done. We remove also like noisy data, and then we represent each researcher output in a vector. And this vector has a JSON format, so it can be exchanged. And then after that, using these vectors, we try to measure similarities between different researchers to build a research topic map. And then we visualize the output of each researcher. So this is the data we collected. We tokenize and remove, for example, English language stop words like punctuations, and then our physical units also, they are not of significance. We use regular expression to extract chemical formulas. We use some Japanese dictionary translated to the English version, digital English version, to extract measurement-related terms. And then this is an overview of the number of terms we extracted. Okay, I'm gonna try to. Okay, so here we represent each researcher, all these frequent terms that were collected from every section in all his papers, and then the domain knowledge resources that we used in a vector, and then we assign a weight for each section, because we believe, for example, like terms in the title has more significant in representing the researcher work. So this is somehow result. You can see here, for example, these are 3 visualization of 3 different researchers from NIMS. 2 of them belongs to magnetic and spintronic materials, and 1 is advanced measurements. You can see like spin, and in these A and B, for example, spin is here, and magnetic, and some like Heusler. Heusler is a famous alloy in magnetic material. And then we did this topic map construction. So now each researcher can be connected to different others researchers using this JSON format for the representation of each researcher output. So by this, we aim to facilitate collaboration with between researchers with the same interest. Okay, and next, this is some analysis of how well this approach has done. Like basically here we effect of author order, because like when the author is as the first author or corresponding author, that means this paper is more representative for him. So we collected, this is a comparison between all terms in only the first and corresponding author papers and all terms in all papers, and we can see that, for example, the Heusler, here this researcher is famous for working on Heusler. Okay, so there is some differences, and then here using domain knowledge resources or without using them. So of course, when we use them, we were able to find terms that we cannot find by just normal tokenization schema. Okay, so this is just some analysis. Okay, we did some clustering to make sure that we really get the point that people working on the same topic usually can belong to the same group. And we choose 2 centers. This is a clustering for these researchers, and this is an evaluation, internal and external evaluation. So it appears that we have done somehow okay. So in general, we presented an approach to use natural language processing to extract and manage materials research data, topics specifically. Okay, next is recently the OpenAlex, I think, this open public library now offering like maybe millions of publications. And the nice things about them is they already use the topic analysis, and they already build some hierarchical concept map, and then we can use this in our work also. Yeah, we can use also more advanced techniques like transformers. Okay, and since we are talking about fair data, and I would like also to introduce you briefly to the recent work also called DICE. This is a materials data platform. So has different service, and also it follows the FAIR principles, where data assigned a metadata, and then there is a unique format, and data can be exchanged, and also it's machine readable. So this has several services like data storage, like MatNavi, for example. It stores all materials properties for alloys. And it has also publication MDR, publication repository, or data related to publications in material science. Okay, so here is the outline. So this platform is used to create data, experimental data or simulations, or text and data mining data, and then use this data. So because all data are stored in machine-readable format, then researchers in materials informatics, like me, I can use this data to do materials design and discovery, and also publications. And this, currently we are planning to extend this platform, not only for material science, but also all over Japan. Okay, so thank you very much. That's all from me.
So thank you. It was very interesting. Nice insight into the material science.
I hope so. Because it's a material science, so I'm not sure if the audience, all of them are familiar.
I think, is there a question? So I'm pretty sure, so there's one. You get the microphone from the back.
Hi, really interesting. Now for topic modeling, which is very much related to my field, which is natural language processing, there are a number of standard packages like Mallet and others. So my first question is, did you use one of those available packages or not? And why did you or why did you not? And also your choice of approach, also, the package or not, which particular aspects of FAIR, the F, A, I, and R, do they especially promote?
Okay, so thank you. This is very interesting. So first of all, for the new approaches, this project has started a while ago. So I just used basic NLP approaches. I didn't use these new packages, but we are planning to use them in the future. And then for this concept, first, we would like to make this data open to the public, and they can easily absorb this information because we visualize them. And then we support the concept of interoperability, because these data are all stored in JSON format. Then the machine can handle them, and researchers in NIMS can also access this data easily. Because usually, from my work experience, we get data, and then there are different formats. So people can start transferring between these formats. So we try to focus on this interoperability. That's okay? Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we continue now with the... Hi, Larry. And so we continue now with a part of reflection. So what did we achieve? And what is the next steps? Okay. So what is the intention? So how was the process? So the FDO Forum actually started in early 2020. So we have now behind us, there are 2 years of quite hard work and specification and implementations. And this was mainly done on voluntary basis or with very small money, actually. So the questions are now, what did we achieve, and what is the state at the moment? What is ahead of us? Should we just continue as until now? So the FDO steering committee and executive committee actually decided to start an intensive discussion during this conference. So we are here. We have like 40 minutes to discuss about this topic. We will also include the whole FDO community here, and yeah, there should actually be no taboo when we talk about these things. Mainly Peter will now give some thoughts from the TSIG and BIG working group, co-chair group. And we have Larry Lannom here. He couldn't be here with us in person, but we have him online with us, and he will talk a little bit about the roadmaps for the next steps. All the documents you can find on the Google Drive, and they are open for comments, and here you find the short links in the presentations, which will be made available afterwards.
Yep. Thank you, Ivonne. So as Ivonne already indicated, these are just discussion documents, and what I and Larry will do is just kicking off the discussion if you want. So we hope that many of you will participate in these discussions after the conference, during the conference. So let's see, I have a few things. So when we talk about what we did and what we should do next, then we have a few dimensions. So we have the specification work. You already got a few items, a few ideas about what we did. We have some implementation work ongoing. We have community building work, policy work, funding, issues, industry outreach, which is very important, at least for me, and organizational aspects. So let me briefly go through. Larry will then go on the roadmap document, which will mainly focus on specification and implementation work. Oops. So I was one. So I think what we can say is that many people now know about FDOs, but there are still many, of course, are still not convinced out there asking basic questions. So we still have to do a lot to build community, especially to make specialized documents, which is, as you know, not so easy. What I also discovered is when we, and we'll briefly mention that, when we discussed intensively with industry, and here I speak about Gaia X, Industry 4.0, and these people, so large consortia, which get a lot of money at this moment, we're now discussing with them in detail what the models are and how, where they differ and where they are similar and so forth. And this is the kind also of documents which we need to do. So some people already said when we presented our first version of a comparison document, oh, that's interesting, now I understand what they're doing and what you want to do. So we need to be better in these documents, for sure. We have about 500 on our list and probably need to see, you know, but also engage with workshops to see, you know, to do better crowdsourcing to get the right people into these workshops, into our work. There's another issue is the FDO Forum, which we started, George and some others started 2 years ago. Is that understood or accepted as a caretaker of FDOs? Probably not. So we need to do some, we have to do some work. And of course, what we all know is that running code is convincing community people, so we have to do a lot here. As said, just to give you some dimensions for thinking. So policy outreach. At this moment, well, things are changing. Hans Günther is here, and we're working hard together with Hans Günther and Stefan to get some German money. And just yesterday night, there was another bit of white smoke that we might get 20 million, Hans Günther, something like this, and not for a side project on FDOs, but really in the focus of the FDOs. Well, I'm always scary with the politicians, sorry. But until I didn't see a written statement, you should always be careful. But it seems, at least in the German discussion, which also has to do with the discussions about German Institute for Data, but also with the industry discussion, that there's a kind of sphere emerging that FDOs could be interesting. So it might be the case that this is changing right now, that we get indeed some core money for FDOs, and then we have to see how to integrate all the people who are interested. EOSC, if you look at the EOSC documents, it's the EOSC interoperability framework document. I think it's called so. It's full of FDO. Maybe it's outdated. But there's no call yet for something like this. So something we did wrong. NFDI, so that's the German, much money going into German research infrastructures. They are, for understandable reasons, they are, and I just talked with Evelyn. Evelyn is part of one of these big infrastructures. They are focusing on vertical solutions. And I think that makes sense, since to get a lot of people with them, to engage people, to get people out of their ivory tower, to understand, to make them understand what infrastructure means. I think it's important, but as you can see at this moment, there's hardly any money, real money for what someone in the core called abstract. Oh, these abstract things, we don't want to fund them. So we need to see how that comes out. Of course, we only have, so thanks to Naturales, we have only little support for all this organizational, administrational things. So Tina is here, thanks Tina. And this was already very helpful, I must say, to get all these document process and other things done, but it's not sufficient. And in US, and George and Larry, so we're not have a grounding yet, right, if I can say so. So there's a big gap, and we have to work on this. Industry outreach. Let me make some words about that, since you probably may not know what we are doing. So we have signed a memorandum of understanding with DIN, and Stefan is here representing DIN, and Stefan is very active. So DIN is the German ISO, if you want. It's not correct, formally correct, but you understand what I mean. So it's the standardization organization. And we are working together very closely, and Stefan really put a lot of effort to bring us together with industry people. That really turned out. I think we have now already six meetings or so with industry people. And you know, we're coming closer and closer, and they start understanding what we are talking about. And the major difference, which you see again and again, is that we talk about persistence, and they talk about solutions tomorrow, right? So if you look to Gaia X, not blaming anyone, they have to produce something in 3 years, and they're all busy to get this done. Lots of promises, as you know. So, and we are looking for persistent or administrationable solutions, and there's a difference. Okay, so we're working together with Industry 4.0, Industrial Data Space, and all these things, Gaia X, which is really working out nicely, since and tomorrow we will have some talks about this, since we now understand, oh, you're talking this way, oh, we are doing this way. It's really interesting. But we have to do more. And now the organizational point, let me be very short. We have a, how do you say in English, lumpy organization. So we just put it together. So we have a steering committee, now 30 people or more, since we wanted to have people from other regions of the world, and it was necessary. And then we decided, oh, there's more work to be done, so we should have not just the co-chairs, but also some more in the core to also discuss what next, what in the future. And let me just, when you see next, just give me not all the details here. You might have a look at this. But when we discussed this, there's a whole spectrum. Some people argued, oh, FDO Forum, we could stop now our work since we've done the basic specifications. Other people said, well, especially when I talk with industry and standardization organization, they say, well, if you want to be taken serious, you have to have a legal entity. Otherwise, forget it. You know. So you see, that's the whole, how do you say, the whole range, do you say so, of possibilities. We are in discussion, and we would like to include you, of course, in this discussion. Of course, the question is then, you know, how to come across this voluntary approach. Do we need fees? All this stuff is in discussion at this moment, and we all want to have you included. So I would suggest to listen to Larry now, since Larry will take up the roadmap. There's a roadmap document, probably all wrong, but we did it. And Larry will get us through the roadmap document, and then we should discuss it, right? So Larry, can you hear us? Are you ready? I will click the slides.
Yes, I'm ready.
Ooh, that was very loud. Okay, Larry, go.
Okay. All right. So give me a second to adjust my multiple screens here, since I'm trying to both talk and see the slides.
While Larry is setting up, I should tell you that you have always to deal with me and Ivonne, since we are almost the only chairs which are have not health problems. So we have to excuse our other colleagues.
Okay, I didn't really understand that, but I hope it was
That was good.
All right, so, okay, if you can hear me and see me, then I will get up my slides. So for better or worse, I'm used to doing builds, PowerPoint builds. So instead of me clicking it, of course, I'll just have to have someone else. So I will say the word click. And every time I say the word click, someone will hit a button, and I hope that this all works in synchronization. All right, on to the talk. Roadmap. So to talk about how to proceed next, of course, we need to know where we're going. Then we can talk about what do we need to get there, where are we now, and how do we get from here to there. So this is, I'm going to pull us back up to being a fairly general point. Click. So where are we going? Did the click work? I don't see it on the screen. Yes, okay, very good. Click again. All right, so a very interoperable, a very high level definition of where we want to go is a global interoperable data space in which previously unencountered data objects can be interpreted, understood, and operated on by autonomous agents. This is extremely ambitious. I don't expect to see this anytime soon, but this is the goal. The second bullet.
It's on there. Yep.
We need this. Yeah, I see it on the screen. Thanks. I'm telling myself to advance what I'm looking at. We already have a huge amount of data, research and commercial data, and we need to exploit it in ways that unaided humans cannot. There's more data than there are human beings. We need the machines to be able to navigate this data and find connections that we won't otherwise be able to find. There's lots of problems that we have to solve. Science can't solve all the problems. Business can't solve all the problems, but the problems that can be solved, we need to work on. We have an obligation, a moral obligation to do the best we can. And this interoperability has to be across space and time, which is another way of saying that current data has future value. If you have data now that you think will be of value in 50 years, that's good, but you cannot tell me what the computing environment will be like 50 years from now. So we need to have as high a level of abstraction as we can imagine. We need to be flexible going forward, and we have to do this with minimal standards. So what do we need? What is needed? Minimal specifications for various software components and network infrastructures that when brought together create the required environment. We need an infrastructure to do this. We need a test bed and a set of use cases that can be used to evaluate the interoperability and fairness of those components. We absolutely need to, this is not philosophy, this is engineering. We need stuff that works, even though we need to do it at a level that's almost hard to imagine. But in the end, it's engineering. And the final point, we need maximum flexibility. I learned this from Bob Kahn, who will give the keynote here. And I've phrased it a little badly. You need to keep getting rid of requirements until the last thing you get rid of breaks it, and then go back a stage. You absolutely need to be flexible, especially if we consider over time. Okay, so I see, I guess the whole next slide is out there, right? The minimal infrastructure components, okay. I meant that to be a build, but that's fine. So there's lots of ways to characterize these components. And this is the way I think of it. This is one such characterization. The first is persistent identification. This seems to be now accepted. If you have information entities out on a network, to manage them and to use them, you absolutely have to be able to reference them. And you, again, talking about longevity and persistence, you need to be able to reference them over changes in technology. You can't tell me what computing or information, maybe it's not even computing, you can't tell me what information management will look like 50 years from now. And also ownership. Yeah, ownership changes. It's no longer the case that you just have a journal in a library that you can go and read, regardless of what else happens. You have the data somewhere and someone's managing that and curating that data, and that has to be that has to be flexible enough that I can still get at that data in the future. Typing, which is to say characterization of the data. If we're going to have automated processing of large amounts of data, especially across domains, we need to have that data parsable without human intervention. That's a fundamental goal of FAIR and of FDO, which follows it. We have to associate the data with the information needed to process it. And we need to have that typing information, that characterization available in well-known sets of types. Ideally, that would be bootstrappable. I don't expect that to happen anytime soon. But it is at least the case that if an object is of a certain type, I know what I can do with it. Then we need a way to speak to these objects. So we have now, if you follow the rest of the stuff above, you have persistently identified objects associated with attributes that enable interpretability, and I need a way to interact with those objects. Again, that interaction has to be more than give me the object or show it to me. If I'm going to interact with 1 million objects, I can't look at every one of them. I have to have some way to interact with them. And that requires an interface or a commonly agreed upon set of interfaces that everyone understands. And finally, again, back to the engineering, we have to put these together. The functional requirements have to be turned into implementations, best practices, domain-specific approaches, etc. And it has to be flexible so that we have minimum that everyone builds on and ways to extend it. Next slide. I guess we're back to, I can't tell where we are, sorry.
It's all there
all right.
now.
I think I see where we are. Okay, you have built the next slide. So I start pulling out the 3 phases now. We had a preparatory phase, which is where we, stand on the toes of giants, as the phrase goes sometimes. A lot of people have worked on the idea of managing information and interoperability. RDA was in many ways put together just to do that. FAIR looks at it from a slightly different perspective. The Dana Foundation, CODATA, W3C with PROV, etc. Lots of people have been working on this. What we've started with specifically is the RDA core data model, the kernel work, the DOIP, and information identifier retrieval protocol specs. That's the updating of the handle spec. EAS, CODATA. There's now a great group in RDA called DO Fabric Interest Group. So that's what's happened till now. Then we have the ramp up and the future. So the next slide should show some detail on the ramp up. Yes, okay. We set up the working groups, so Peter has addressed some of this already. We set up the working groups. We started drafting a basic set of specifications, recommendations. We created a process for doing that over time. We formed the core of a new organization. What happens to that organization next remains to be seen. And we organized this conference, including this meeting. As to the future, that's the next slide. We have to, again, this flexibility. We're not creating a new internet. We can't do that. Every innovation has to build on what's happened before. It has to accommodate it, at least in some fashion. We need to figure out how to fund it. Like many organizations, we currently are in an odd place of having international efforts funded by national governments. This is a whole other topic. So we have to decide on how to organize this. We have to finish the specs, and we have to figure out the implementations and testbeds. And that's the end of that.
Okay. Thank you, Larry. So now we are here to hear your voices. And it's all recorded, so take care of what you're saying. We'll get you, like Stian, we'll get Stian. Paolo. Oh, the microphone. Yes, thank you.
Thanks. I have some complex messages to launch. So you were referring to the dimensions of reflections when you thought. So I'm missing there the point E infrastructures.
Sorry?
The point E infrastructures.
Oh,
there
the
are,
E infrastructure.
In my opinion, there are too less reflections about the infrastructures, because everything, if should be run, then we need the infrastructures.
Yeah.
Now, the point is, to make an example, you presented the model that the point of entrance is the PID, the DOI, for example. This is the theory. If we go into the practice, then we remark at the moment we have a massive import of data into the E infrastructure. We need more than one test bed, because we start, according to your model, with a DOI. So we generate first the DOI, and then we create the whole digital object on linked to this DOI. This works very well if you have a single object. In the case you have a massive launch, then you have to check it, to check the whole, let's say, 60,000 objects you have created. Yep. And then it happens, for many reasons, that about 10% of them, they have errors. Right. You have to recreate them. So the test beds, I have some use cases. We did it at our university. So the solution is to have two test beds and then the productive point. And this is generating costs by person, by skilled persons, quality checks, and so on. It was just to make an example. So we need a closer look to the infrastructures.
Thank you, Paolo.
Just a second message, and then I must stop.
Thank you, Paolo. It will not surprise you that in the FDO work, there are at least 2 or 3 of the big infrastructures involved in the heart. So GBDG, he is there. So Ulrich was the same, and KIT is another big infrastructure in Germany. And in US we have Illinois and so forth. So there, some of the big guys are involved, but you're right, we need to, when we really get money from the German ministry, big money, then we have to see how to involve Jülich and others. Fully correct, since they have to be the machinery where we have the registries and so forth.
Give me the chance for one sentence. So just one sentence. There is a parallel action happening now in Europe, which is the possible creation of an e-infrastructure forum. I don't know if you're aware of this, but maybe they should be contacted.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Paul. Other suggestions for us? Wouter.
Peter, earlier you addressed the question of outreach and finance, and some clear questions. One of them was, do we have to wait for a call? There is no call coming somewhere in the world. I think that you should not wait for it and be proactive. The strength of what you're doing is that it's voluntary, but it's also the weakness. Yeah. So a solution might be to find active one or more organization that want to adopt and host this activity and also pay for it. At a larger scale, as now has started very well by Naturalis, but it must go further around the world. Yep. I think there are 2 approaches, at least for Europe, but there might be similar ones elsewhere in the world, and I would like to hear a suggestion that I have then. You had a contact with a European Open Science Cloud. That is now a membership organization. Only if members sufficient say, we should do this, they will do it. For example, I can, on behalf of the University of Amsterdam, sit in the board and say, let's do it. But we must have at least 10 more. Similar is like Gaia X. Gaia X has also now starting a Gaia X Institute for long-term developments. I'm involved in a scientific program. There is still an option, but there's also a membership organization. My university is also a member. I can do it, but we need at least 10 more, and also from industry. They might be interesting. So my question is, would be not an idea for you to ask of different people if their organizations are a member of such an initiative and want to bring it on the table? And you might have similar things. I know that in the US you have also these kind of initiatives, so that might be a way proactive to do something?
Walter, it's recorded what you said. I may lead you to the Leiden Declaration, so please sign it. What we will do also is have a, I'd say, start an interaction with people who are in organizations to see whether we get organizational support. No fees or so, but just support. So it's the next action, which we need to do. I mean, to be honest, there was no power anymore before this conference, right? So we were just limited. But after this conference, we will do this. And this was a suggestion that comes from Kunrad. Kunrad is here. Yes, so Kunrad is from University Bergen, and Kunrad also has said at a certain moment, well, you know, I'm participating in FDO work, I should get support from my university, and so forth. But this includes also membership, so we should indeed be more active. But this costs all time, and now we are, I think, we're there where we can spend that time. So thanks, Walter. Other comments? So when we discussed, oh yeah, I see one. Let me just finish this sentence. So when we discussed, Stian presented and I presented very shortly, we had the feeling that we should now, we have the feeling, as I think Ivonne said, that the basic specification, and Larry also said it, that some basic specifications are there, but that's not sufficient. How to move on? So our idea was, to now detect a certain set of areas where we need to invest time and talk more, get people together who also invested something, developed something, so people with practical knowledge as well. And we showed two issues, two possibilities where we should start working on to get convergence. I mean, it's all about this convergence, which is difficult. So I would like to ask you all, is that the way to go? So not having again so many workshops, working groups, but maybe just one or two, but then focus on workshops, on dedicated workshops where you guys come up with ideas. We have some ideas, you come up also with ideas to focus on specific areas. But Larry mentioned RDA. RDA is for me a great institution since people come together. When we do something, it should be, the point should be convergence. I mean, if there's no convergence possible, I mean, why should we sit together? Then RDA could discuss it in much better ways. So there was a hand over there. Yes.
I know.
Is the microphone there?
Oh, the microphone is here.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the middle.
The microphone is here.
Oh, then you go.
So, thank you very much for the insights and about the state currently and the start of the discussion in here. Peter, you were talking about the community, and for me, it is the question, who is a community in here? So, for me, just from my perspective, the community are the domain scientists, since I come from scientific data management and research data management. And, of course, those who are building up the research data infrastructures. Paolo, what you call the e-infrastructures. I think this is the same definition in here. So, but what do we need? We need to convince. We really need to convince. And this is what Larry pointed out, use cases. And I think we mean the same. For me, these are applications demonstrating the usefulness of fair digital objects, not just test beds or demonstrators, infrastructure demonstrators. These are boring, to be honest. What we need are really the applications where we see the benefits. So, and we need them to convince. So nobody cares about a new computer, how the processor works. We just care about what can we do with it. And this is something we need to show. And this shouldn't be abstract. It should be done with good examples and so on. And I think this is directly the direction we need to go. And after we're convinced, funding will come.
Thanks, Rainer. I think, Rainer, I think we don't disagree. So I think we need to come from both directions. So have basic things like you do with validators, simple validators which are in the basic to test that something is according to the specifications, but also if people, as Descartes said, so Ivonne is from the German Climate Computer Center, part of the world, what's called?
World Data Center for Climate.
Exactly. So and they also work with these kind of technologies, but focusing on the applications, right? So we need to come from both sides, but it costs a lot of time and money. There was another call, another hand.
Yes, I'm right here.
Huh?
Herbert van der Sompen.
Herbert.
So I just want to share something that really struck me when Larry was talking. When he referred to the work that is going on as, a long-term framework that is supposed to cover generations of computer infrastructure and all. And what that really made me think of is of the Open Archival Information System reference framework that is used a lot in digital preservation, which is also at the very abstract level, also meant for many generations to come. Now, things about OIS is that no one actually implements it. And everyone claims compliance with it. And so what that really means is that it does not lead to interoperability, but it does guide implementations. That's why it's a reference framework. It helps people to think about what they should take into consideration when they build information systems for the long term, for digital preservation purposes. And so this really struck me in the way Larry was talking about this long-term thinking, that maybe what you're doing is not something that needs to be implemented, but something that rather guides implementations.
Thanks, Herbert. Larry, did you hear that? Silence.
I did hear it.
Good.
And
you first.
I think that's a good observation. I think there might be some middle ground there. Certainly, we need the high-level objectives and framework, and I hadn't thought about that Open Archive for a while, and it's a good thing to go back and look at. We should go back and look at it. And then at a somewhat different level, we do need some implementation guidelines with the idea that they match, but they might change over time. That's my. Well, I have to give that some thought. I'll have to go back and look at it. So thank you, Herbert.
So we have to come to conclusions in a moment.
Just 2 cents in discussion. I'm Romain David. I'm involved in the FDO Forum semantic working group, in other working group. I think that the human face of FDO Forum must not be forgotten. And there is something to provide is evangelizer. People that are reaching communities that are not well known and that have not the same understandability of what is behind the models that we have constructed with the Reyes models, very complex. It's not so complex when you explain it step by step. But we need really an evangelizer network and a data stewardship community, and perhaps FDO Forum is a good place to do that.
Thank you, Romain. We can only agree with what you said, Romain. I mean, just to give an example, Herbert complained in the previous session about the very simple diagram. I used that simple diagram, which is wrong, or not complete, let me better say, it's not wrong. I used that with the interaction with industry, and people immediately understood where I was talking about. Simple diagram, not so complex at Ulrichs. Well, it's not quite correct, as Herbert said, or is confusing, let me better say confusing, but it's true. We need to, when you talk with different people, no, that's bad English, specific group, you need to define a specific language or so to talk with this group, and that's not always easy to find out. That's a long process. Ivonne, where are we? 5 o'clock.
Yeah. So thank you for the discussions.
Wait. We should motivate them to contribute. So let me do it.
You can do it.
So there are these documents out there which we showed, which are just thoughts, and we would really like, so all of the executive committee and steering committee, we would really like to get you on board of this discussion. You could write your own pamphlets and put it there, or send it to us. We'll put it there. It's an open discussion. There should be any taboo. Is that an English term, Stian? A taboo? Yeah, well known. Okay, clear. So there should be no taboo. As I said at the beginning, some people say, well, you know, FDOF could stop now. Well, we could. Other people say, well, if you want to be taken serious, you have to become a legal entity. So this how do you say, the range is big, and we would like to get your comments into the discussion. And we will certainly, Dimitris, I guess, and George, certainly organize some forum or so to discuss that, right? Open forum. That was Carol hammered on us to not be too restrictive, but we'll do that.
I also have some motivating words, I think. So with these discussions and how is it going on, I really look forward to the different contributions to the conference the next days. So I think there will be very interesting ideas, solutions, whatever. So, with this, I would like to thank you for this discussion here, and the official opening will be in 30 minutes.
Half an hour.
And then we have hopefully a great conference.
Thank you very much.